Hey, second graders, it is time for Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle Chapter 8, Part 2. In the first part of this story, we met a set of twins named Joan and Anne, and they always fight. They're always fighting. Their mother calls it quarreling, which is another way to say fighting or arguing. Okay, so we're going to see what happens next. In came the twins. Joan looked at her melon and then at Anne's. She said, Anne's melon is the biggest. She always gets the biggest and the most of everything. Anne said, You had the biggest yesterday. You're a pig. You always want the most. Their daddy said, As a matter of fact, ladies, I have the biggest melon because I was the first one dressed. Now hush. And he glared at them. The twins sat meekly down at their breakfast. They had taken 2 bites. However, when Anne poked Joan and hissed, I've got the most cereal, ha ha ha. Joan hissed back, Yes, but I have 3 pieces of bacon and you only have 2. Anne looked, and sure enough, Joan did have 3 pieces. She grabbed one, but Joan snatched her wrist, and in the ensuing scuffle, they managed to tip over Anne's milk and spill it all over the front of their nice blue pleated skirts. Their daddy was not happy. Their mom sponged them off and they left for school, red eyed and miserable, but still quarreling. As they rounded the corner, their mother could hear, That big tablet is mine. Tis not. Tis too. After Mr. Russell had left for the office, Mrs. Russell picked up the telephone and called her friend, Mrs. Quicktrick. She said, Mrs. Quicktrick, this is Mrs. Russell, the twins' mother, and I want to know if Jasper and Myrtle ever quarrel. Oh dear, said Mrs. Quicktrick. All children quarrel. Why, yesterday Myrtle hit Jasper with a big doll, and the eyes came out, and then Jasper hit Myrtle with a little hammer out of a nice new toolbox. And then the head came off the hammer, and I just told them that I wouldn't have them breaking their new toys that way. Mrs. Russell said, But the children weren't hurt. Mrs. Quicktrick said, Why, I didn't notice. I was so angry at them for breaking their lovely toys, and the doll hospital won't be able to put Myrtle's doll's eyes back for 2 weeks. And you know how hard it is to get those hammers these days. Mrs. Russell said, Well, thank you anyway, Mrs. Quicktrick, and hung up. She poured herself another cup of coffee, and while she drank it, she thought and thought about her little fighting quarrelers. Then she had an idea. She would call Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle and ask her what to do. Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle would know, if anybody. She called Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle and said, Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle, I am Mrs. Russell, and I am the mother of Anne and Joan. Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle said, Oh, yes, the twins. Such darling little girls and so pretty. Mrs. Russell said, But they quarrel so, Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle. They begin fighting at the moment they open their eyes in the morning, and they don't stop until they fall asleep from exhaustion. It is dreadful, Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle. You should hear them. Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle said, Oh, I know. That's my sock. It's mine. No, that's my box. No, that's mine. Tis not. Tis too. You have the most. You're a pig. Mrs. Russell said, Why, Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle, you must have heard them. I was hoping that they didn't quarrel when they were at your house. Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle said, No, I haven't heard Anne and Joan, but I've heard hundreds of other children. You see, fighter quarrelistics is common for children disease, and it's often very contagious, but very easy to cure. Easy to cure? Oh, Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle, how? Asked Mrs. Russell. Well, said Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle, in the first place, fighting and quarreling are merely habits. One morning a child wakes and feels cross, and so instead of smiling at his brother and saying good morning, he glares at his little brother and shouts, You've got on my shirt. The little brother says, I have not, but he hasn't. The cross child says, you have to, and the quarreling has begun. The next morning, both children have the fighter quarrelitis, and they wake and begin shouting rudely at each other. It soon becomes a habit, and they forgot how to be courteous. Now, Mrs. Russell, I believe that if fighter quarrelers could hear themselves as others hear them and see themselves as others see them, they would soon realize how unpleasant they were and would be cured. Okay, we're going to stop right there. So, what do you think the cure will be for the fighting quarrelitis? Make a prediction, and I'll see you next time.